Welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled to have you here today because, well, we are going to unpack one of the absolute most bizarre, visual, and downright shocking prophetic acts in all of ancient history. Just imagine walking down the street in a bustling, ancient capital city, and suddenly you see one of its most highly respected figures walking around stripped down in utter humiliation, completely refusing to say a single word about why he's doing it. It's this massive historical mystery. But today, we're going to demystify the whole shebang by looking at the text itself, the archaeological records, and the fascinating geopolitics of the ancient Near East. Okay, let's just dive right in.
To set the scene, Isaiah chapter 20, verse 2 states, "Go and loose the sackcloth from off thy loins, and put off thy shoe from thy foot." And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. This was the direct command given to Isaiah, the son of Amos. And you really have to picture this. Here is Isaiah, a prophet who normally commands immense respect, just abandoning all normal decorum. He's voluntarily taking on this intense public shame right in the beating heart of Jerusalem. But what did that actually look like to the people watching him on the street?
Now, you might be wondering, was he literally, entirely nude? Well, historically speaking, we need to be clear here. Isaiah wasn't completely naked in the modern sense of the word. Rather, he was stripped of his outer garment. You see, the prophet habitually wore this rough sackcloth robe. Think of someone like Elijah or John the Baptist. By taking that off, he was left only in a rough, short inner tunic that was worn close to the body. And he was completely barefoot. This brilliantly, and kind of shockingly, illustrates the exact, humiliating reality of a prisoner of war or a slave in the ancient world. He was literally mimicking the absolute lowest station a person could possibly hold in that society.
And the timeline of this? It's staggering. Month by month, for 3 whole years, Isaiah silently walked the streets of Jerusalem looking exactly like this. Whenever he went out among the people, he looked like a man already prepared to be dragged away into an ignominious exile. And apparently he was prophesying through this act, but in total silence. He didn't explain himself at all. For 3 years, he created this intense knowledge gap for everyone in Jerusalem. They must have been thinking, why on earth is he doing this? What is coming? Well, to answer that, we have to look right outside the city walls.
That brings us to part 1, the fall of Ashdod and ancient geopolitics.
We absolutely cannot understand the prophet's wild actions without understanding the terrifying geopolitical tension happening right next door. Isaiah was essentially performing a living sermon directly tied to the power struggles of the era. So let's set the board. On one side, you've got the Assyrian Empire, an aggressive, seemingly unstoppable war machine that is just devouring territory. On the other side, you have Egypt and Ethiopia. These were viewed as the glorious, opulent superpowers of the region, the guys you'd run to for backup. Caught right in the middle is Ashdod. Ashdod was one of the most ancient and heavily fortified Philistine cities, essentially acting as a very vulnerable buffer state between Assyria and Egypt.
And the spark that lit the powder keg is recorded perfectly for us. Isaiah chapter 20, verse 1 states, "In the year that Tartan came unto Ashdod, when Sargon the king of Assyria sent him, and fought against Ashdod and took it." Now, really quick, Tartan isn't actually a person's name, it's an official title. Think of it like a 5-star general. He was the commander of the Assyrian armies, second in authority only to the king himself. So Sargon, the big boss, the king of Assyria, dispatched his top guy to handle a very specific uprising in Ashdod.
Sargon's own historical annals, specifically these amazing inscriptions found at his palace at Khorsabad, confirm exactly how this campaign went down. It's like a mob drama. First, King Osri of Ashdod decides to revolt and refuses to pay his tribute to Assyria. Well, Sargon doesn't take that lightly. He marches in, deposes Osri, and puts Osri's brother, Oxmith, on the throne instead. But then, the people of Ashdod rise up against him and choose a brand new king named Yamin. At that point, Sargon has had enough. His army marches back, lays a totally devastating siege, and completely captures Ashdod, carrying off its gods and its treasures as loot. These events utterly terrified the entire region. They really spooked the minds of King Hezekiah's counselors in Jerusalem, leading them to dangerously consider forming an alliance with Egypt to save their own skins.
So the absolutely crucial point here is how these historical events line up. In 713 BC, Tartan's campaign against Ashdod begins, and right at that exact moment, the Lord commands Isaiah to strip off his sackcloth. Through 712 and all the way to 710 BC, while the Assyrian army is out there crushing the buffer state of Ashdod and sending shockwaves of pure panic through Jerusalem, Isaiah is walking around naked and barefoot. The timeline runs perfectly parallel. The aggressive military campaign happening outside the city walls mirrored the bizarre, silent warning happening right inside. Talk about immense suspense building up.
Moving right along to part 2, a living, walking sign. The mystery finally resolved.
Finally, after 3 incredibly long years of silence, the suspense breaks. The mystery is resolved, and God reveals the explicit meaning behind the prophet's confusing behavior. Isaiah chapter 20, verse 3 states, "Like as my servant Isaiah hath walked naked and barefoot 3 years for a sign and wonder upon Egypt and upon Ethiopia." This silent act was a masterclass in visual communication, meant specifically for the Jews in Jerusalem. It was a calculated shock tactic designed to break their dangerous dependence on these neighboring superpowers. Isaiah was literally acting out the exact horrifying fate that awaited the very nations Jerusalem was hoping would save them. Which leads us to part 3, the shame of Egypt, a very tragic reality. This brings us to the real core of the warning, the tragic, prophesied reality that was about to completely shatter the illusion that Egypt was somehow invincible. Isaiah chapter 20, verse 4 states, "So shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptians prisoners and the Ethiopians captives, young and old, naked and barefoot, even with their buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt." This is the grim, ugly reality of ancient warfare. Prisoners of war were stripped by their conquerors, thrown into barely any rags, and forced to march through the dirt without shoes. The skirts of their garments would literally be cut off, a deliberate psychological tactic used to humble and mortify the pride of the defeated. The mighty, glorious Egyptians were going to be reduced to the exact pathetic state Isaiah had been modeling for 36 months.
And history proves this out beautifully. I mean, archaeology backs it right up. Sargon's grand inscriptions, discovered in the halls of his palace at Khorsabad, specifically boast of a massive, successful battle against Pharaoh Sebek at Raphia. Sargon's own records proudly indicate that, as a consequence of this battle, the great pharaoh was forced to become tributary to the king of Assyria. The archaeology directly corroborates the stark warning of the prophet. Assyria's war machine was, in fact, unstoppable.
So what's the psychological fallout of that? Isaiah chapter 20, verse 5 states, "And they shall be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia their expectation, and of Egypt their glory." Think about it. When you put literally all your hope into something, and then that something is utterly destroyed right in front of your eyes, the result isn't just fear. It is profound, gut-wrenching shame. All those hopes of help from Egypt were going to prove completely, 100% futile.
It really highlights a tragic irony here: expectation versus reality. The leaders in Jerusalem expected Egypt to be their ultimate glory, a powerful, reliable shield against the terrifying Assyrian conquest. But the reality they would soon face? Witnessing that supposed shield stripped bare, completely humbled, and led away barefoot into captivity. They'd be left incredibly ashamed that they ever placed their trust in them to begin with.
And finally, we arrive at part 4, the danger of misplaced trust, a timeless warning. You see, this isn't just an ancient geopolitical history lesson. It carries a really profound theme about the sheer danger of misplaced trust. Isaiah chapter 20, verse 6 states, "And the inhabitant of this isle shall say in that day, Behold, such is our expectation, whither we flee for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria, and how shall we escape?" Now that word isle actually refers to the coastlands, places like Tyre, Phoenicia, and Cyprus. Just imagine being an inhabitant of those vulnerable coastal cities. You look at Egypt, the absolute greatest power you know, and you watch them fall to Assyria. The sheer panic that must set in, because if the strongest guys on the block just got dragged away in chains, how in the world are we going to escape?
This misplaced awe in worldly empires, it's totally timeless. We see it pop up again and again. Revelation chapter 13, verse 4 states, "And they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" Whether we are talking about the Assyrian war machine of the 8th century BC or the prophetic beasts of Revelation, humanity just has this persistent tendency to look at aggressive earthly superpowers, assume they are invincible, and place our ultimate reliance and even our worship right into their hands.
And that right there brings us to the core takeaway from the prophet's 3-year silent sermon. Isaiah stripped himself of all dignity to show his people that the earthly alliances they trusted in would be stripped completely bare. So, I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. When the supposedly invincible earthly superpowers and alliances of our world inevitably fail, where do you flee for true deliverance? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this helped demystify this fascinating, bizarre piece of history for you.